Welcome back to the West London Witch. This episode contains a story that details the process of death, loss, and grief, and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Feathers, butterflies, flocks of magpies, and rainbows are all supposed to be signs that our loved ones are reaching out to us from the other side. And as lovely as it is to interpret a snowy white feather as a message from beyond the veil, for those of us in deep grief, it's hardly a relief, barely a comfort. And although you know you should be grateful, you just want more. You want more than a fleeting whiff of your grandfather's cologne, more than a whisper from your departed mother. Something clearer than a coin in your path or a dragonfly resting on your knee. However, on the flip side, it's hard to know what's a sign and what you want to be a sign. On January 28th, 2021, under a full moon in a velvety sky of shimmering stars, my longtime boyfriend, Kyle, proposed to me, with a little help from our puppy, Nala. It was such a beautiful moment, so uniquely us and perfect in every way. Except for when it came time to share the news with our families. I wanted nothing more than to rush to my grandmother's house, show her the ring, drink champers together, and begin to talk serious, as we called it. She always told me not to wait too long. She told me that if I waited too long, she would be walking down the aisle with a Zimmer frame. And how I wish she could walk down the aisle, Zimmer frame and all. I tried to not let the sting of her loss creep into Kyle and I's special moment. But I think anyone who has suffered a deep loss can relate to the hollow pit that forms in your chest when you think about sharing news to someone who's no longer with us. When Kyle and I called my parents in California to tell them of the engagement, my middle brother, Alexander, sat with my mom. And as soon as they picked up the FaceTime call, I was shocked, stunned, and absolutely speechless. My brother Al has very distinctive green eyes. My grandmother also had green eyes, but they are nothing like Al's. But as Al sat before me, he had my grandmother's eyes, so clear. It was as though my grandma was looking directly at me. As we told them about the proposal, Al began to look more and more like my grandma. From the way he held his head to the shape of his smile, it was almost as though I was looking at Al with a grandma filter on top of him. I didn't say anything during the call. I felt a little strange about it, truth be told. But the next day, I told my mom what I had seen. I told her it was as though Grandma was there, in Al. She sat very quiet on the phone. She said, "It's funny you say that. After we got off the call, Al said he felt really strange. He said that as you were telling us the news, he felt really cold and absolutely overcome with emotion. He said he was bursting with happiness and completely taken over with joy. He said that, of course, he was happy for us, but he's a 21-year-old guy who was actually kind of freaked out by how overjoyed he felt. He told my mom that he didn't feel like himself. I really struggle with this experience. On one hand, you can say it's a beautiful sign from above, a gift that I was able to tell my grandma face to face. But I also have to stop myself because I want to experience my grandma so badly. Perhaps I'm just seeing her because I want to see her. I want so desperately for her to come to me and say, "That was me, you're not crazy." But that's the tricky thing about signs from the other side. They are seldom clear, rarely undeniable, and sometimes leave us with a lot more questions than answers. Hello and welcome to episode 30 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments when we find ourselves very much not alone. Christmas for some is the most wonderful time of the year. But for those who are grieving, their greatest wishes cannot be found under the Christmas tree. As difficult as the holiday season can be, I find it so important to focus on hope, light, happy moments, and to remember that just because our loved ones are not physically here with us, it doesn't mean that they're not around. A girlfriend of mine sent over a Huff Post article about a man who lost his father and found some peace in an unlikely place. So I contacted the author, Noah Michelson. He's the head of Huff Post Personal. And after reading his article a few times, I felt really prepared for our meeting. But I was in no way prepared. I was not prepared for Noah's honesty, his raw, genuine candor, and his open, loving spirit. Together we laughed, cried, and talked about love and loss and how the human experience is one to be shared. And I am so thankful to Noah for sharing this story with us today. Now, you have been prepared, so grab a box of tissues, a fresh hot chocolate, and curl up by the fire. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is The West London Witch. Episode 30, The Stories That Tie Us Together.
So some of my earliest memories are of the paranormal. I've been obsessed since I was a kid. I think my first memory is not even a memory of my own. It's a story that I was told. When I was 3 or 4, I was playing with my mom and I started crying for my grandmother uncontrollably, and we didn't know why. And the phone rang and we got a call that my grandma had just flown through her windshield and was in the hospital. We couldn't explain it. And so that's the story that I've been told since I was little. My family is very superstitious. The kind of thing where you didn't have 13 people at a dinner table because one of them might die. You didn't travel on Friday the 13th, same reason. Supposedly, my great-great-great-grandmother lived next door to a werewolf in Germany. And he was a really nice guy, but when there was a full moon, you had to lock up your chickens or he would come and eat them. So that all was sort of in the background of growing up.
Although Noah's family was superstitious, his parents were not religious or fantastical. This fascination and belief in the supernatural seemed to have been born into him. Throughout his childhood, Noah became increasingly more obsessed with the mysteries of the universe.
And when I was about 10, my parents got me this book series called the Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown series. They had commercials on TV all the time.
This was a subscription service where each month a new book would be shipped to your home. The books covered all sorts of wonderful mystical and mythical topics like the lost city of Atlantis or Stonehenge and unicorns and manticores.
But the book that I was obsessed with was about mediums and about psychics. There was something to me about someone being able to have this power to reach out across the veil and speak with people who had left. And at that point, I didn't know anyone who had left. It wasn't like I was really missing my older brother or my grandma even. I was just mesmerized by the idea that someone could do that they could act as, like, I've put this in this way before, like a mystical transistor radio. and that they could tune in to whatever ghostly waves were out there. And somehow they could coax those people into the room or into their head, and they could tell you what was going on with them. Maybe they had a message for you. Maybe they wanted you to know about why they had passed over. Maybe they wanted to let you know that you shouldn't feel guilty about something. So even at the age of 10, I was obsessed with that.
These books had such an impact on Noah, he tried everything he could to experience communicating with the other side himself.
And at first, I thought maybe it was as simple as just asking the ghosts to show up. I thought if these people could do it, I have no idea how they're doing it. But I would lie in bed at night and I would literally say out loud with the covers pulled up to my chin, kind of terrified, but also really mesmerized and excited by the idea of it, the intoxicating idea that someone might show up. And I would just say, if anybody's passing by, if anybody can hear me, I'm listening, come visit me. And I would wait. I would wait for something to happen. I would wait for a book to fall off a shelf, or I'd wait to hear a voice, or I'd wait to see something materialize at the foot of my bed. But nothing ever happened. I didn't know why. I thought maybe I just didn't have the gift. You know, in these Time Life books, the one that I loved about the medium, they seem so, I don't know if sexy is the right word, but they seemed like superheroes.
Noah may have been resigned to the possibility that he himself might not have the gift. But that wasn't going to stop him from his pursuit of figuring out how one communes with the other side. He decided that he was going to study the science behind mediumship.
And this is the 80s. This is before we've got, you know, all these shows about ghost hunting and everyone wants to be a ghost hunter and everyone's making, you know, EVPs on their iPhones. That didn't exist back then. But I found out that Duke University in North Carolina had an institute where there were real scientists who were studying all of these things. And I thought, maybe I can be a part of that. Again, I'm 10 or 11 years old. Like, why would I get to be a part of that? That makes no sense. But I was precocious and I was ambitious. And so I wrote them. I found an address and I wrote them and I said, I want to study with you. What can I do? And to their credit, very sweet of them. I'm sure it was some research assistant who got tasked with responding to this 10-year-old weirdo in Wisconsin. They sent me these pamphlets where they had photocopied some studies they had done. And I think one was about remote viewing. So psychics finding, you know, locations in other parts of the world, even though they were in a lab. And there was one about psychokinesis. So trying to influence the rolling of dices. And I just became obsessed. And so as I became a teenager, I kept researching. I'd get every book I could get out of the library. A lot of it was very sort of woo-woo and not very helpful, not very scientific. But I just sort of took in whatever I could take in. I was like a sponge.
Through all of Noah's research, he realized that his gifts did not match the needs required to become a scientist with the Duke University lab. He wasn't great at math or science, and he wasn't a medium himself. So he needed to figure out the next best thing.
So I went to college. I left Wisconsin and I went to Minneapolis, which is a step up from where I was living, a bigger city with more that I could explore. And I remember being in downtown Minneapolis a couple weeks after I moved to the city, and I saw a psychic's storefront. And I had never seen that before. I didn't know that there were people who literally just had shops where you could go in and talk to them and pay them. And they would do this. They would talk to the dead or they would tell you about your life. And again, sort of the same feeling I had when I was trying to conjure the ghost in my bed when I was 10 years old. I was drawn to it, but I was scared of it too. I didn't know if I wanted to know. I didn't know what would happen if I walked through that door and I asked this person if they could do what they said they could do. I didn't know if I could trust them. I didn't have very much money. I was only 18 years old and didn't have a job and I was in school. But there was a sign next to the door that said, special $10 reading. And I thought, you know what? I can spend $10 on this. So let me go inside. I went inside and there was a woman chain smoking at a little table. I can still see it. She was middle-aged and she had a carton of soggy French fries on the table and a pack of tarot cards and an ashtray and a little TV, and she was watching Oprah Winfrey. And I came in and she gave me a look kind of like, okay, I'm trying to watch Oprah, but I guess we'll do this reading. And she motioned for me to sit down, and I sat down and I said, I'd like the $10 reading. And she said, okay. I gave her my $10 and she asked for my palm. Now, I didn't expect a palm reading. I wanted to hear from some ghosts, but I didn't know what to expect. So she looks at my palm for just a couple seconds. She says, in a really sort of low, kind of worried, concerned voice, like, this is not good. And of course, again, I don't know what's going on. I've never done this before. And to have this woman that I don't know, who supposedly can speak to the dead and who knows things about me that I don't even know, to have her tell me something is bad right off the start worries me. And she hasn't proven anything yet. She hasn't told me anything about myself or about anyone I know. So I don't even, there's no reason for me to believe her. But she says, you have a ghost that is tied to you. And it's the ghost of an ex-girlfriend. And she is ruining your life. And I immediately knew that this wasn't going the way it should go because I was gay. I was still in the closet. Nobody knew I was gay, or probably most people knew I was gay, but I hadn't told anyone. So I definitely never had a girlfriend. I had never been on a date with a girl or a guy. So the fact that I had this ghost of a girlfriend who was trying to ruin my life seemed pretty far-fetched.
This reading goes from bad to worse when the lady proceeds to tell Noah that there's nothing to worry about, as she has the ability to vanquish the ex-girlfriend ghost for the low price of $150.
I knew it was obviously just a ruse. So I told her no. She was angry at me, probably for wasting her time and making her miss Oprah, but also because I wouldn't give her the money. And I laughed. And I was so disappointed because, again, I'd come up against another wall. I couldn't talk to ghosts. I couldn't study ghosts. And now this person who said that she could do this, who had a storefront, who did this for a living, she couldn't talk to ghosts either.
Incredibly, this experience did not deter Noah. He kept seeing different psychics. He refused to let one bad experience derail his quest for the truth.
And again, I don't know what was burning or is burning inside of me that made me feel like I needed to do this, but there was something. I was just so mesmerized by it. But I also was happy that I sort of had that first experience where I was like, oh, right, I need to really be on the lookout for what I think is genuine and what I think is not genuine. I wasn't, even though I really wanted this to be true, I refused to just sort of take anything someone gave me. But I started to get wiser and I started to read more. And actually, throughout the 90s and the 2000s, there was more literature. There were more legitimate studies being done. There were more people who were wanting to talk about this kind of thing. I learned about cold readings.
Cold reading is a tactic used by mediums and fortune tellers where they quickly analyze a person in order to figure out a little bit about them. They will listen to how you speak to hear what type of education you have or where you may be from. They will observe your body language, clothes, hair, and make inferences about your sexuality or religion. They will fish for specific information by asking vague questions like, do you know someone whose name starts with the letter A? Or, there's an elderly woman here who is like your grandmother. It's clever because we all know someone with a letter A name. And most of us have some older woman in our lives who has passed.
And they just sort of keep fishing until you land on something. So everything changed for me in 2006. My dad that summer got a cough, and it wasn't the kind of cough that sounds like they've got a cold. It was the kind of cough that you hear it in the grocery store and something's wrong. So in October, we learned that my father had lung cancer. And not only did he have lung cancer, he had stage 4 lung cancer, which means there was nothing they could really do for him. This was a shock, to say the least. My dad was 62 years old and he was incredibly healthy. He was a lawyer who loved his job. He wanted to do his job until the day he died. He loved my brothers and me. I have two brothers, and he dedicated his life to us. And he loved taking long walks with our dog. He took fists full of vitamins and supplements every day. He did everything he could do so that he could be as healthy as he could be. More than anything, my dad loved my mom. They had the kind of relationship that you read about or hear about in the movies, in like Hallmark movies. 35 years after they met, when one of them walked into the room, the other one's eyes would still light up. I would still wake up in the morning when I would come home to visit them, because at this point I was living in New York, and I could hear them in the morning from my bedroom laughing. And so we started on this journey where he tried to fight it for a couple months. And then at Thanksgiving, I'll never forget this, they called us Thanksgiving Day, his doctors, and they told us that the cancer had spread to his brain. And you know what was so shitty about that is that it was Thanksgiving. It was my dad's favorite holiday. And I thought it was so cruel that they would call and tell us on that day, because nothing was going to change if they had called us Monday and told us. And again, it was one of those moments like with the psychic where I just sort of all of a sudden, I'm 28 at this point, but I still kind of think like there's goodness in the world. And the fact that that happened, I just thought, why would you do that to us?
After that terrible call on Thanksgiving, Noah's dad went through a change. The once vibrant and loving husband and father turned sour, nasty, angry, and so full of disbelief that this could be happening to him.
In January, I get a call from my mom, and she tells me that my dad's going to stop treatment and he's just going to die. Sorry, this is very emotional for me. But I remember the phone call, getting it on the street corner. I remember exactly the street corner I got it on. And I had just finished grad school, so I didn't have a job at that point. And I was lucky enough that I could come home to Wisconsin and spend the next 4 weeks with my dad and my mom and my brothers and help him die. And in the night that I got home and my other brothers got home, we all piled into my parents' bed. And my dad gave us all of his watches. He had this watch collection, and we got to pick the watches we wanted. And that was the last night that he was a real person. It's like he had saved all of his energy and everything about him for that night. And it was a beautiful night. And from there, his life and our lives became a horror movie. He went on a hunger strike because he just wanted to die. And he turned into a zombie. He weighed about 80 pounds. He had to be in diapers. And we would take turns lying in bed with him. So he always had someone next to him and he knew we were there. And I remember at one point he asked me if the doorbell rang, and he asked me if that was the people who were there to kill him because he just wanted to die. And he asked my mom and he asked me if we would kill him. And sorry. We couldn't do it because we were afraid that we would go to prison, because you can't help someone die here. They have to do it themselves, and he couldn't do it. And we had all this morphine, and there were so many times when we almost did it, but we were too afraid. And that's something I live with to this day, the guilt. But he finally, March 12th, we heard, my mom and I went into his bedroom to move his body over, because when someone is in bed when they're dying, you have to keep moving their body. Otherwise they get bed sores and those become infected, and it's very painful. At this point, he was no longer there. He was literally just a shell of a human. And he would moan sometimes, and that's when we knew it was time to give him more morphine. But he hadn't been doing that for a while. He had just been lying in bed and was silent for days. And at this point, all of a sudden, though, he was making this horrible noise. And I didn't know what it meant. And my mom said, oh, that's the death rattle. That's the noise that someone makes when someone's dying. It means that they're very close to the end. My mom, unfortunately, has helped a lot of people die. And, but I never had. And I'm going to say this, it's going to be a little hard. I'm going to get through this. He hadn't been there. Like I said, he hadn't been there in his body for days. And my mom walked over to him and she said, it's okay. You can go now. It's okay. And he looked at her in the eyes and he was there for a second. And then he disappeared and then he was gone. And it was the saddest, strangest experience of my life, but a beautiful one. And the fact that I got to see that happen between the two of them, I felt like I shouldn't have. It felt so intimate and so private. But it was literally, I don't know how to explain it, but it was literally like pure love in that room at that moment.
Nothing, absolutely nothing can prepare you for seeing someone die. You can be forewarned, told stories about it, made aware of the process. But until you experience it, you cannot imagine how it feels to be with someone as they leave this plane. On one hand, you're thankful and grateful to have been there. But it is the single most devastating experience to witness, and it does fundamentally change you as a person.
So, the ironic thing is that, so my dad passed, this man that I loved so much, who loved me and loved my family so much, he passed, and I didn't look for someone to try and reach him. And I think it was just too raw. And I just think that it was all of a sudden, this thing that I thought was so much fun, this idea of going to meet a medium or seeing a psychic, that I had just, it was a fun way to spend an afternoon and $50. It was real now.
Noah was worried that maybe his dad wouldn't show up. Not because he didn't love and adore them, but perhaps because there was nothing on the other side. His dad was an atheist who thought that when you passed, you just went into a state of eternal slumber. And what if he was right?
No, I'm not sure. I think when you're looking death in the face, literally, if things, I think things change. And I will tell you, I mentioned that my dad was so angry when he found out he had cancer. When I came home to help him die, everything had changed. He was at peace. He had made his decision and he wasn't angry anymore. So we never talked about it, but I don't know if he thought maybe he was going somewhere else afterwards. So I got a job at a magazine, and I was writing articles about entertainment and celebrities, and it was really exciting. And that was a really kind of bittersweet moment too, because my dad never got to see me do any of that. I had been in grad school for poetry. I had been a poet, and he had always supported me, even though what a stupid thing to do. What a stupid thing to spend $80,000 on to go to grad school to become a poet when you won't be able to pay your bills being a poet. But he always supported me in any way he could, and he never said it was stupid. But I got a job at a magazine, and I somehow happened upon this medium who lived in New Jersey and had a reputation for really being able to do what he said he could do. He supposedly could talk to the dead. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to interview him. And I was doing all these little video interviews. And so I found out that there's a restaurant in New York City called the Cornelia Street Cafe, and it's supposedly haunted. So I thought, what a fun place to do a video with him. So we went there, we did the interview. No ghosts came through that he said. And I just asked him about his life and about how long he'd been a medium. And unfortunately, I don't think the video is still online, but it was a very sweet little encounter. And afterwards, he said, well, since we're here, do you want to get lunch? And I thought, okay, let's do it.
This was a very professional encounter. Noah was working, and the medium before him, who Noah said looked more like a middle school principal at your friendly neighborhood school, wasn't there to give a reading, only to do the interview. But as the two men sat down for lunch, the medium threw Noah quite a curveball.
He says, well, I'm assuming you want to see how this works, right? And I thought, number one, I knew he was booked out for years, literally years in advance. And I knew he charged hundreds of dollars. And so there was something even like a little bit unethical for me to ask him to do a reading for me for free, especially because we had just done this thing for the magazine. So I pushed back and I said, you know what, that's so sweet of you. You don't have to do that. But thank you. And he said, no, this is just what I do. And I can't promise you anyone's going to show up, but we will just sit here and we'll have our lunch. And if someone comes through, I'll let you know. And I thought, okay, in the back of my head, I wondered, would my dad be there? And of course, my previous experience with mediums and psychics, I wanted to see if he was the real deal. I wanted him to be the real deal, but I didn't believe. And so I always had this protocol that I use with all psychics where because I'd read about them enough, because I had enough of my own experiences, because I knew about how people were now doing this on TV and cold readings and hot readings and all this stuff, I gave very little information when I was getting a reading. So I only gave yes or no answers. I didn't provide more details than I needed to provide. And I was on the lookout for those fishy questions like, oh, I'm seeing a person who died of an illness somewhere in their chest or their stomach or their head, or anyone, how many people die of an illness in their chest? They're not dying of an illness in their little toe, right? So I was on the lookout for that. And I wasn't going to make this easy for him. If he was the real deal, he was going to have to prove it. So he starts by saying, well, you know what? There's someone here already. There's this older woman with red hair. She's short. She's standing behind you. She's a loudmouth. She won't shut up. And she keeps saying, Ethel, Ethel, Ethel. And she's pointing at herself. Does that make any sense to you? And I tried to keep my composure, but my grandma, my dad's mom, her name was Rose, and she was your sort of stereotypical loudmouth Jewish grandma. And she was short and she had red hair and she never shut up. And the craziest thing about it is that she looked just like Ethel Merman, who was this actress and singer from the 40s and 50s. And my whole family always called her Ethel because she looked just like Ethel Merman.
Noah was stunned. No one outside of the family even knew they called Grandma Rose Ethel. And it was so obscure, so specific. And this man had nothing to gain by trying to pull one over on Noah. His interest was immediately piqued.
My antenna went up and I thought, what is going on here? And he spent the next 10 or 15 minutes then saying other people were coming through. And he would say things like, okay, there's someone here and they were a baker. They had a bakery in like the 20s or 30s, and they were known for making these little pies. Does that make sense to you? And literally nothing he said to me over the next 10 or 15 minutes made any sense. And part of the reason I think that is because I don't know my extended family very well. I don't know my ancestors very well. I don't know like any of my dad's aunts and uncles. I don't know any of, anyone like that. So I couldn't confirm or deny it. I just didn't know. And then it happened. The medium said, oh, now there's a man here with Ethel. And I think it's your dad. Did your dad pass recently? I said, yes. And that's all I told him. And he said, okay, well, he has a message for you. Do you want to hear his message? And again, up until this point, everyone had come by, even Ethel, even if that was my grandma, she didn't have a message for me. She was just sort of saying she was there. And everyone else who showed up was just kind of saying hi or doing a drive-by. Nobody had a message for me. And I thought, do I want to hear the message from my dad? Of course I do. But I also was kind of terrified. So I said, yes, I want to hear the message. And I tried to be as composed as possible because, again, I didn't even want to give this guy any sort of reaction. I didn't want him to play off of anything. And so he said, he wants you to tell Ruth that he loves her. And it was like the air got sucked out of the room. I'm sure I didn't have a very good poker face at that point, because if my dad were going to come back, the one thing I knew he was going to say is that he loved my mom. Now, that seems pretty obvious, right? You can Google that. You can Google that my dad died because I was writing for a magazine. I was a pretty public figure at this point. My dad's obituary, he was a judge and an attorney, and he was a very well-known and well-liked person. So his obituary was not hard to find online, right? My mom's middle name is Ruth. And the only thing that my dad called her was Ruthie. And no one else called her that. No one. Her middle name wasn't in the obituary. And there's just no way that he could have known that my dad would use that name to talk to my mom. So it was incredible. I couldn't explain it. My head was just, I was spiraling. And then he said, he has one other thing that he wants you to tell her. He wants you to tell her that she can get rid of his ties now. I don't know what that means. I don't know if your dad had some ties that were very special to him or to her, but he's showing me his ties and he's saying, tell her it's time to get rid of them. It's okay to let them go.
Noah knew that his mom had not cleaned out his dad's closet yet. It was a perfect time capsule back to the last days of his life. His mom had told her sons she just couldn't bring herself to go in there. And the boys were totally understanding of that.
So the fact that he knew that my mom still hadn't gotten rid of my dad's ties a year, 2.5 years later, that was just shocking. So I believed, or at least I realized, or I thought that something I couldn't explain had happened. And that was all. My dad left. Supposedly, the person, the spirit, whatever that was there left. We finished lunch. I thanked the medium for what he had done. And I just felt like I had eaten 3 Thanksgiving dinners and I'd been on a roller coaster for a week. And my head was pounding, my stomach was flip-flopping, and my heart was 16 sizes too big for my chest. And I walked back to my office, which is about a 20-minute walk. And the first 10 minutes, I just tried to figure out what had just happened. Was it real? You know, how could I explain this? Did he Google me? Did he see the obituary? But if he did, how did he know about Ethel? How did he know about Ruth? How did he know my dad's clothes were still in the closet?
Noah tried ferociously to pick it apart. But try as he may, he kept circling back to the same conclusion. It must have been his dad.
So I called my mom on the way back to the office and I said, Mom, I talked to that medium and he said he had a message from Dad. And she said, what? And then I said, well, he said, tell Ruth that I love her. And my mom started crying. I started crying. And I said, and that's not it, Mom. I said, I know that you haven't gotten rid of Dad's clothes yet, right? And she says through her tears, I'm so sorry. I didn't tell you. But just a couple weeks ago, I finally did it. I went into his closet and I bagged up everything and I took it to Goodwill. And I just got rid of it all. And I don't know if you wanted any of it, but I just didn't know if I would ever be able to do it. So I just did it. And I said, oh, that's so weird, because the medium said that Dad wanted to tell you, you can get rid of my ties now. It's time to let them go. And my mom started sobbing. And she said, finally, when she could catch her breath, oh, Noah, the only thing that I couldn't get rid of were his ties. They're still sitting in his closet. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I think that by him telling her to get rid of his ties, the last thing that she was holding on to, I think he was trying to nudge her towards closure. I think he was saying, it's been 2.5 years and you can't do this forever. And I love the idea that you're holding on to me, but you can still hold on to me and without doing it in this way. Now, again, I'm a human being. I'm attaching my own emotions and my own logic to all of this, right? But I can't explain those things. I can't explain the way he described my grandmother. I can't explain the fact that he knew about my mom's middle name. I can't explain how he knew about the ties.
That Christmas, Noah's mom surprised her boys with a beautiful gift. She had all of her husband's ties made into blankets, one for each of the sons. It was a new way for his beloved collection to live on.
You know, this was almost 14 years ago that this happened, this experience. And I haven't heard from my dad since then. And I don't know why that is. I'm not sure if he just thought, I will show up and that will let you know that I am still here, but you got this and you all can do the things you need to do. And I'm going to go back to whatever I'm doing in this ghost world. I think maybe he just thought, you don't need me. And I'm always going to need my dad, right? But I don't know that I need my dad to show up and tell me things. Maybe I was tricked. Maybe none of it was real. I don't like to think that, but I also still hold out for that possibility. I can't explain what happened, but I also can't. I don't know that until I see my dad or someone else that I've lost shimmering in front of me that I'm going to really believe.
Noah's mom, on the other hand, is totally convinced. And I agree with her. I understand why she feels that way.
I've been able to take this experience and it has taught me so much about loss and about grief, but about love and the idea that I want my dad to stay here with me. And every year, every month, every day that he's not here, it's harder to keep him here with me. It's harder to hear his voice. It's harder to remember the things we did together because I guess that's probably an evolutionary thing in our biology, but in one way, as cliche as it sounds like, time does help heal. The less you remember, the less you're dealing with that trauma. But I don't want to forget him. So I keep him tethered to me by telling these stories. I keep him tethered to me by reliving these memories, the memories that I have, even the horrible ones. Those are things that keep him here with me. And it's taught me so much about love and about the fact that if he did come back to me, if he did show up in that little restaurant on that October day with my grandma, he would not have shown up for anything less than to tell me that he had a message of love. And any time that he shows up, that moment or any time in the future, any time that his words bloom in the mouth of whatever medium I'm sitting in front of, whoever is lucky enough to have my dad show up, because I was so lucky to have him in my life for 28 years. And I believe that it is a gift that anyone, any spirit, anything that gets to come in contact with him would be so lucky. Whether that was real or imaginary, whether that was true or false, whether it was his ghost or I was being fooled, that felt like a gift. That day felt like a gift. And I would be the foolish one, I think, if I didn't translate that, whether or not it was real, into carrying his memory forward.
I don't believe you ever get over grieving. I think you just develop mechanisms to cope with it. You don't grow out of grief, you just grow with it. And Noah is absolutely right when he says that he is tethered to his dad through stories like these. Through sharing stories about our loved ones, we keep them alive. We keep our memories active, and we get to share their light with others. This Christmas, I urge you to reminisce about the old times, the good times, and look back at them with joy and happiness. And take that light with you into the new year. From all of us here at the West London Witch, I thank you for your constant love and support through 2021. We look forward to bringing you more stories from the other side in 2022. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and a very Merry Christmas. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.